On the evening of November 24, 2009, a 26-year-old medical student named John Edward Jones entered Nutty Putty Cave, a hydrothermal cave system located just outside of Utah Lake. Known for its twisting, narrow passages and deceptively tight crevices, Nutty Putty had a reputation among local cavers as dangerous. And John knew this. He had explored it once before when he was younger. But this time, he wasn't a teenager messing around with friends. He was a husband, a father, and a soon-to-be doctor, back in Utah visiting family for Thanksgiving. So, when his younger brother Josh suggested a quick caving trip with some friends, John agreed, never realizing that this decision would lead to one of the most tragic and widely publicized caving disasters in American history. Nutty Putty Cave was discovered in 1960 and quickly became a favorite for amateur cavers in Utah. It wasn't especially deep, just 1,400 feet in length, but what it lacked in size, it more than made up for in claustrophobic horror. Its passageways were narrow, winding, and unrelentingly vertical in places. After a few too many close calls and rescues, authorities had closed it off in 2004. But by 2009, it was reopened with certain precautions in place. What no one knew was that it was about to claim a life in a way so brutal and inescapable that the cave would be permanently sealed forever. John, his brother Josh, and a group of 9 other friends entered the cave around 8:00 p.m. They began by navigating known, documented parts of the system. But just under an hour into the expedition, John decided to explore a narrow, downward-sloping shaft that he believed was the entrance to a section known as the Birth Canal, a tight squeeze that opened into a wider chamber. But he was wrong. What he had entered was an unmapped fissure, a dead-end tunnel no one had cataloged. He lowered himself headfirst into the tight vertical shaft, using his hips to inch deeper. His arms were pinned to his sides. His legs kicked behind him, searching for leverage. Then suddenly, he slipped. His torso dropped vertically into the crevice, but his hips got wedged at an angle, caught between the rock walls in a way that bent his body into an unnatural and paralyzing position. He was now 100 feet below the cave's entrance and stuck, not just stuck, but upside down in a shaft only 10 inches wide and 18 inches high. At first, he stayed calm. He called out for help. Josh heard him and immediately rushed over, trying to grab his brother's legs to pull him free. But the more Josh tugged, the more John slid downward, wedging himself deeper into the rock. By the time the group realized they were out of their depth, John was already lodged upside down in a space no one else could easily reach. They called 911 at around 9:00 p.m. Within an hour. A team of professional rescuers and volunteer cavers had begun assembling outside the entrance. But nothing about this rescue was going to be simple. Nutty Putty's entrance shaft was only accessible by crawling, and rescuers had to pass through the same tight, winding corridors just to get to John. When the first team finally reached him, they realized the full horror of the situation. His body was upside down at a 70-degree angle, squeezed into a V-shaped rock shaft with no way to turn, rotate, or bend his limbs. His circulation was already compromised. Working in shifts, rescuers tried everything: ropes, pulleys, harnesses, even applying lubricant to reduce friction. They drilled into the walls to place anchor points. But each attempt to pull him out met the same problem. John's legs were trapped under his own body weight, and every tug made his condition worse. By early morning, it had already been over 12 hours. Gravity was taking its toll. Blood was pooling in his head. The human body isn't designed to be inverted for long. John was still conscious, still coherent. He spoke with his rescuers, told them about his daughter, about how he was going to make it out. But time was running out. At around 6:00 6:00 a.m., they tried a new pulley system using a rescue line bolted into the cave wall. For a moment it worked. John moved up a few feet, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief. But then, without warning, one of the bolts snapped loose from the wall and slammed into the rescuers, injuring one of them and collapsing the rope system. And John slid back down, even deeper than before. After nearly 24 hours upside down, John began to deteriorate. His voice weakened. His heart struggled to pump blood against gravity. The rescuers tried to talk to him, to keep him alert, but soon his responses stopped. At 11:56 p.m. on November 25th, just over 27 hours after becoming trapped, John Edward Jones was declared dead from cardiac arrest brought on by positional asphyxia. He had suffocated slowly, upside down, while an entire rescue team fought with everything they had to save him and failed. In the days that followed, his body remained trapped inside the cave. The shaft was too narrow to extract him, and any attempt to remove the body risked further injury or death to the rescuers. After consulting with the family, officials made the devastating decision to seal the cave permanently. A concrete plug was poured over the entrance, turning Nutty Putty into John's tomb. A memorial plaque now sits near the site, honoring a man who was loved by many, a father, a husband, and a victim of one of the most harrowing cave disasters in American history. But John's story, tragic as it is far from the only horror to unfold beneath the Earth's surface. In the next story, we'll travel across the world to the Middle East, where a deadly flood inside a cave system in Oman left a group of explorers clinging to life and each other in a race against time. In October of 2015, a group of 7 experienced spelunkers, 3 Omanis, 2 Germans, and 2 Americans, gathered in the remote limestone plateau of Selma, high in the eastern Hajar Mountains of Oman. Their goal was to explore Majlis al-Jinn, one of the world's largest underground chambers. The name means meeting place of the spirits, and the cave's sheer size is staggering. A single chamber spanning over 300 meters long and over 200 meters wide, with a ceiling that reaches over 120 meters high at its tallest point. Majlis al-Jinn is not a tourist attraction. The only way in is through one of 3 vertical shafts in the rocky mountaintop, the deepest of which drops nearly 160 feet straight down into darkness. Once inside, the cave opens up into a vast, echoing dome of silence and shadow. It is breathtaking, beautiful, and unforgiving. The team descended using static rope lines, rappelling down through one of the tighter vertical shafts called Kashalat Makandeli, a 40-meter-long narrow chute that opens into the heart of the chamber. The descent was smooth. Inside, the team marveled at the immensity of the cave, so large, you could fit the Washington Monument inside with room to spare. The group spent hours mapping, photographing, and exploring, their headlamps casting long shadows over the uneven rock floor. By evening, they set up a small base camp in one of the raised alcoves near the wall, planning to rest overnight and ascend early the next morning. What they didn't know was that a storm system was rapidly forming over the Hajar Mountains. Despite the region's arid climate, flash floods in Oman can happen suddenly and with deadly force. Water from distant mountains can travel through underground channels, funneling directly into cave systems like Majlis al-Jinn. And that's exactly what happened. At 2:43 a.m., one of the Omanis, Sultan al-Muqbali, was the first to hear the noise. A deep rumble like distant thunder echoing from the vertical shaft above. The others heard it soon after but mistook it for wind. Then, a sudden rush of cold air swept through the chamber, followed by something far worse, a roar. Water. Within seconds, a massive torrent of floodwater poured through the entrance shaft, falling like a waterfall from the ceiling and crashing onto the cave floor. The flood didn't trickle in, it exploded. Everything turned to chaos. One of the ropes snapped from the pressure, slapping against the stone and nearly hitting one of the German cavers, Matthias Engelhardt, who was already scrambling for higher ground. The water was rising faster than anyone could react, inches every second. The base camp was swept away in under a minute. Bags, gear, lights, everything gone. The team scrambled up the jagged limestone ridges that lined the walls of the chamber. But Majlis al-Jinn's walls are slick and steep, and without climbing anchors or dry footholds, the higher they went, the more impossible it became to hold their ground. One of the Americans, Bethany Clark, lost her footing and slid back down into the rushing water. She disappeared beneath the surface. For a moment, no one could speak. The sound of water echoed everywhere. Sultan and Matthias shouted her name, their voices drowned in the chaos. Then, miraculously, a hand appeared. Bethany had managed to grab onto a ledge and was clinging to it with torn fingers and a broken wrist. Matthias crawled to her and dragged her up just as another surge hit the chamber. The team regrouped on a small outcrop about 15 meters above the rising water, soaked, bleeding, and terrified. There was no cell reception, no emergency beacon, and no way to climb the rope that now swung wildly above a waterfall of death. Then came the worst realization of all: the water wasn't stopping. They had no idea how long the flooding would last. The air was growing colder. Hypothermia began setting in. Adil, one of the younger Omanis, started shivering uncontrollably, his lips blue. He hadn't brought thermal clothing, assuming the cave would stay warm. With no shelter, no dry clothes, and no food, the group was facing multiple threats: drowning, freezing, and the psychological strain of being completely cut off from the world. After 4 hours, the water had risen to within 8 meters of their ledge. The air inside the chamber felt thin and humid, filled with the stench of mud and decay. They were trapped in a cave the size of a cathedral, yet nowhere to run. Around 9:30 a.m., a distant glimmer of hope appeared: sunlight. The clouds had begun to break, the rain above had stopped. But there was still the question of rescue. The team hadn't left a detailed itinerary. Only a few locals knew they had gone into the cave. If no one came looking, they could be stranded for days. Then, miraculously, a faint thumping sound echoed down the vertical shaft. A rope, thick, dry, and heavy, dropped from above. Someone had come. It turned out that Sultan's cousin, who lived nearby, had grown concerned when they hadn't returned by morning. He drove to the cave site and saw the flood-swollen pools near the entrance, and immediately called local authorities. A team of elite Omani civil defense rescuers arrived by mid-morning, lowering new rope lines into the cave. But the rescue wouldn't be quick. The shaft was still slick and unstable. It took until late afternoon for the first rescuer to descend. One by one, the team was harnessed and lifted up cold, exhausted but alive. When Bethany reached the top, she collapsed in tears. Her hands were raw, her wrist broken, but she had made it out. They all had. All 7 cavers were rescued by 7:00 p.m., nearly 17 hours after the flood began. Majlis al-Jinn was sealed again the following year. While technically still open to professional teams with permits, the Omani government has placed strict limits on who can enter and when. To this day, the cave remains a place of immense natural wonder, but also a stark reminder that beneath even the driest landscapes, danger can rise without warning. And yet, the final story in our expedition is even darker than the ones before it. Because, in a deep cave system in Papua New Guinea, what began as a simple mapping survey ended in a mysterious disappearance, and rumors of something non-human lurking in the shadows. In July of 2017, a group of 6 cavers, part of an independent mapping and anthropology project, ventured deep into the Kavirondo Rift, a rugged and poorly charted cave system located in the highlands of Papua New Guinea. The area is known for its dense jungle, steep limestone cliffs, and tribal lands that have remained virtually untouched by modern infrastructure. Several of the cave entrances had been identified by drone scans from a previous expedition, and the team had a clear mission: map the largest unexplored shafts, collect geological samples, and document any potential archaeological findings. The team, composed of 2 Australians, 3 locals, and 1 American researcher named Dr. Lena Voss, knew the dangers. The caves weren't just remote, they were completely undocumented. No official records, no prior rescues. If anything went wrong, they'd be on their own. After spending several days hacking their way through thick jungle terrain, they finally arrived at the cave's mouth, a vertical drop about 20 meters deep into complete darkness. They rigged their gear, descended carefully, and found a vast sloping chamber beyond. What they weren't expecting was how far it went. The walls continued deeper, seemingly without end. Inside the main cavern, they encountered a second vertical shaft, this one dropping over 50 meters. The team set up a base camp just before it and marked their location using signal reflectors. At this point, everything was going according to plan. They explored the upper galleries and collected strange mineral deposits. The air was thick but breathable. Water dripped from the ceiling in rhythmic patterns. And while the caves were unnerving, they weren't inherently threatening. That changed on day 3. It began when Isaac, one of the local guides, refused to go deeper into the lower chambers. He told Lena and the team that the cave beyond the drop was known among his people as Patalo Muru, meaning place of shadows. According to tribal stories, it was the domain of the Silent Ones, spirits that punished those who entered uninvited. Isaac didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in respecting boundaries. He refused to go further and remained at camp. The remaining 5 pushed forward, descending the shaft and entering a narrow, damp tunnel that led to what they thought would be another chamber. Instead, they found something bizarre. Deep within the tunnel, the walls changed texture. Instead of the typical jagged limestone, the surface became smooth, as if polished by machines or tools. Embedded into the rock were perfectly circular holes, roughly a foot in diameter, dozens of them, stretching down into the stone like ventilation ducts. None of it made sense geologically. They took photos and samples, but the unsettling design of the space made them all uneasy. Andrew, one of the Australians, reported hearing whispers, not echoes, not water, actual whispers. Lena chalked it up to acoustic anomalies caused by the cave's strange design, but the others weren't so sure. That night back at camp, things got worse. At around 2:00 a.m., Lena was awakened by the sound of something scraping across the floor near her sleeping mat. When she turned on her headlamp, no one was there, but the small pile of sample bags they'd collected was now scattered across the cave floor. She thought it was Andrew playing a joke, but he was asleep, or at least pretending to be. The others, including Isaac, swore they hadn't moved. The next day, they descended once more. That's when everything unraveled. About an hour into the descent, Samuel, the second local guide, went missing. One moment he was checking a side tunnel. The next he was gone. They called out, whistled, checked nearby passages. No sound, no trace. The only thing they found was his helmet, cracked and sitting upside down in the dirt. Panic set in. They split into two groups. Lena, Andrew, and local guide Kalma took the left path, while Robbie and the American intern Mark went back toward camp to check if Samuel had somehow made it back. But when Lena's group returned several hours later, there was no sign of the others. Isaac was gone. Mark and Robbie were gone. No sounds, no radio signal, just complete suffocating silence. Lena tried to hold herself together. She convinced the remaining two, Kalma and Andrew, to wait until morning, then hike out to get help. But in the hours that followed, they began hearing thumps from deep within the tunnels, sometimes far, sometimes close. Then they saw faint flickering lights like headlamps glowing at the edges of the cavern, only to vanish when they approached. That night, Lena awoke to find Kalma missing. Now only she and Andrew remained, and Andrew wasn't doing well. He was sleep-deprived, paranoid, and claiming he'd heard Samuel calling his name in the dark. When Lena confronted him, he said, "I saw something last night, in the smooth part of the cave. It wasn't human, it moved like liquid." Lena tried to calm him, but Andrew refused to sleep, refused to eat, and by morning he too was gone. Now completely alone, Lena did the only thing she could. She ran. She climbed, crawled, scrambled, retracing her steps through the cave system with barely enough light and zero food. She moved nonstop for nearly 11 hours, navigating by instinct and memory. The sounds never stopped. Sometimes behind her, sometimes overhead. Something was following her. When she finally reached the surface, she collapsed near the base of the jungle path. A local farmer found her the next morning, dehydrated and incoherent. She was airlifted out to Port Moresby, where she spent 3 days in a military hospital recovering. When asked what happened, Lena refused to give specific details. She was polite, reserved, but whenever someone brought up the cave, she went completely silent. Eventually, she told the UN field team who had sponsored her permit. "Something was down there, I don't know what, but it doesn't want us coming back." Of the 6 people who went into the Kavirondo Rift, only Lena returned. No bodies were ever recovered. Their last known camp was found intact, with food, water, and gear still untouched. Their ropes were coiled neatly, radios fully charged. No sign of a struggle, no blood. Just absence. The entrance to the cave has since collapsed after a minor earthquake, and the government has classified the entire area as unstable and off-limits. But locals say that even now, at night, you can still hear whispers echoing from the jungle cliffs. And sometimes, lights flicker in the trees.